two things that were kind of background to this that were in my consciousness about oral history. Back in 1976, my father had interviewed my grandmother, who was a pianist, and she had played for silent films, and just on his own, he did an interview with her and then had her play. It's the only time that she recorded music, but he did this amazing interview, asked really good questions. And so that was in my psyche. Then there's a book that I ran across that somebody had given me in college, written by one of the first oral historians concerning music. And it was some interviews with people who had known the composer Charles Ives. And that deeply impressed me. So here I am at MIT, and I'm at the circulation desk, and Professor Stephen Early, he's long retired now, fortunately he's still with us, is from Hungary. And he was checking out some books, and Peter Munstead was at the desk as well, and Stephen started telling me about some experiences when he was back in Hungary, including working with the composers Zoltán Kodály and Béla Bartók. And I recognized what he was telling me were not in the history book. And the next day, Peter and I were just talking, and we said, gee, it's too bad we didn't have a tape recorder running. And we were thinking about who are some of the other music faculty here who have other things to share that wouldn't make it in the history book. And then Peter had talked to Teresa Tobin, who was our department head at the time, and she heard about a workshop at Simmons College on oral history, and she said, well, why don't you go to that? And so that's basically how it got going. So then in 2007, we got some very generous funding from Lionel Kinney, MIT class of 1953, so that I could do this officially half of my job. Prior to that, the interviews were just as I had time for them.
So how many interviews have you done?
So there are 49 separate interview sessions with 29 people. So sometimes I'll interview somebody more than once, and there are some people I've interviewed as many as 3 times. The distinctive thing about oral history, as different from, say, journalistic interviews, there's an emphasis on depth and really trying to get, a life history as to what's involved in shaping the person in doing what they do, and not seeking questions that are merely probing somebody's personal life, and that's a real distinctive feature, and there's a great deal of background research that's involved, so that you're not repeating what's already in the historical record, so that you can actually my humble hope has always been is that what they're saying has historical relevance, and it's not just kind of a chatty conversation. With all due respects to journalists, and some of the journalists do some background research, but they have limited time to do that. And so,
did you have, when you were selecting the people that would be interviewed, did you have particular themes or goals in mind? How did that selection process work? What were you kind of after?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's a complex one. Some of it was merely the age of the person. For example, Charles Yardley Chittick, when we found out about him, he was 107 when I interviewed him. And I just had to jump on the chance. He was MIT class of 1922. He had played in the MIT Mandolin Club. And I knew that I couldn't wait. He was an amazing person to talk to. He made me feel old. His memory was just sharp. He had interviewed with Thomas Edison, the inventor, and turned the job down. And he was very proud of the fact he had turned the job down. So he didn't want to be the manager of Edison's factory. And Edison wanted a sharp, MIT student. But it was a window back in time about music at MIT and the MIT Mandolin Club. These mandolin clubs were popular on college campuses at the time. That was kind of the hip thing to do. So, but as far as selection process, making sure that I was interviewing, first of all, among the music faculty, significant people who really had, left a real legacy. John Corley, founder and director of the MIT Concert Band for 51 years. He's was a major figure, and I did 3 interviews with him, and Herb Pomeroy, who started the MIT Festival Jazz Ensemble, had taught here for 22 years. And some former students who, during their time here at MIT, had a major impact. And some of the former students have also gone on to have musical lives well beyond MIT. But looking for people who left a musical legacy here. But the project is not only documenting music at MIT, but it's also many of these people's lives have significance well beyond MIT, and are of interest to historians and other interested people as well. A couple of years ago, I got an email from a historian in Poland who was doing some research on American chemical engineers. And one of the people I had interviewed was a chemical engineer. And it turned out there was some stuff in my interview for him that was useful to him because I had asked him about his professional background. And so my hope is that these interviews will be of interest to other people besides here at MIT.
What were some of the themes that emerged? I mean, I know that when sort of in reading your notes that we prepared you prepared in advance, the relationship between music and science and technology. I mean, that must have been something that kind of ran through a number of them.
Yeah.
Can you just sort of talk about the...
That's an interesting issue. It's a complex one, but people ask me all the time. They say, "You work at a music library at MIT? Why is there music?" And they seem surprised. The legacy of scientists being musicians goes back centuries. Some notable examples: William Herschel, who discovered the planet Uranus, was a musician and composer. Alexander Borodin, the composer, was a chemist. Albert Einstein was a violinist. Victor Weisskopf, who taught here at MIT, was a major physicist in the 20th century, was a very accomplished pianist. He would often play chamber music with members of the Boston Symphony. It just shows the level that he played. And also Arthur Maddock, a mathematics professor here at MIT, is a cellist and a pianist, and also a colleague of his, Michael Artin, is also a very accomplished violinist. So what's clear is that there's no inherent dichotomy between being a mathematician or a scientist and being a musician or a creative artist. Where it gets complicated is if you try to find some kind of specific correlation. Um, um, Sometimes people get caught up when scientists talk about scientific creativity, and that word creativity, then they'll say, "Oh, that must be the same as artistic creativity." There are differences, but as soon as you try to define what it is, you get into hot water right away. But overall, what this project really shows that there's no inherent contradiction in in these people's lives. They're not saying, "Oh, I got to turn my scientific brain off. Now I'm being a musician." For them, it's just part of what they do. But it's also a distinctive feature of MIT students and scientists is they're motivated to do things at a very high level, whatever it might be. Some of the directors of the ensembles here have told me that that there's what they particularly like working with MIT students is the attention that they bring to the music making process. They're really focused. If they're told to do something, they don't forget. And though many of these directors have also worked with conservatory musicians, and they say the difference is really noticeable in terms of how quickly MIT students learn. So, and some people say, well, is that because they're scientists and engineers? It's probably more the fact that these are just really bright, super motivated people. There may be some connection, but you start saying really silly things if you try to go beyond that. So.
This is kind of a related question, and don't worry about repeating yourself. If it kind of goes into some of the same territory. But the reason I wanted to ask it is, so I've been doing a lot of work with Fred Harris lately, and I've gotten to meet some of the students that play in the jazz ensemble and who is in the wind ensemble. I was wondering what you could tell me about what you've learned or your sense of the place of music at the Institute, both historically and today. In the lives of students, in the lives of faculty, just in the lives of in the life of the community.
Yeah. The legacy of excuse me of just one moment here. So the legacy of music at MIT really goes back almost to the founding of the institute. A year after MIT was founded, the MIT Glee Club started, and music is a really, really important part of students' lives. Many of them have told me and have told directors of ensembles that had it not been for music, they would not have survived the regimen here. And some people have even said that some of the directors have told me that they thought that music actually kept some of these people from possibly committing suicide. So it's a significant, meaningful contrast to their academic studies. But what's interesting about that is, although it's a contrast, they still bring a focus to that. It's not like, okay, now we're going to goof off and go play in the wind ensemble. It's a different activity, and it means a lot to them. But they want to do it at the same high level they do whatever else they do. And you look at MIT athletics; it's the same kind of thing. Why does the MIT pistol club beat the military academies sometimes in some of these competitions. It's the same kind of focus. MIT also understands well that they want to educate complete people. They don't want narrowly focused people who only do technology. And William Barton Rogers certainly understood that. He was a flute player, and his brother played the violin, and his father played the violin. And the first MIT course catalog, there was a course on physics, but a part of that was dealing with acoustics and physics of musical instruments. I mean, it specifically noted that, and including issues about tuning. So there's even a musical part of the curriculum from the very beginning. So here at MIT, students can major in music, which seems to come as a surprise to people. The music faculty here is a world-class faculty, and the education that they get here, really is on par what somebody would get at a traditional music school. There are not very many music majors every year. There are a fair number of music minors, but then there are lots of people who are just heavily involved. There was a statistic a few years ago. I don't know what it currently is, but they were saying about 1/4 of all MIT students take at least one music course. So it touches many people's lives. And I can think of some MIT students who, when they think back to MIT and in their fond memory, it's not their academic department for science or engineering, but it was the musical experiences. And the MIT alumni are very generous in donating to various musical initiatives here at MIT. So it's a real credit to MIT to understand the meaningful place that MIT has here. They also understand that many of these people, even if when they graduate from MIT they don't play their instrument anymore, they may be on boards of directors of arts organizations or community orchestra or whatever. So they bring that experience into community involvement, and there's countless examples of that.
Were there things that really surprised you in doing? I mean, that maybe that's a long list or a short list. I don't know, but things that kind of stood out, things that you learned that you wouldn't have expected, or.
Yeah, there are. I guess it's the depth of the richness of the musical legacy here at MIT continues to impress me. There aren't very many things that just completely surprise me, but one when I interviewed Barry Verico, who is one of the major figures in the field of computer music. He's a composer as well, and I was asking him about the computer as a musical instrument. And he doesn't consider the computer a musical instrument, even though he is very involved in wanting to find ways of using computer technology in live performance. But he still felt that it wasn't yet an instrument. And I would have figured he might have felt defensive in claiming that it is, because there are lots of his colleagues who go to great lengths to say why the computer is a musical instrument. So that was certainly a surprise, but he gave a very, very thoughtful answer to that. But I would say I guess the surprises is just the depth. Not that I mean, going into it, I knew there was a rich history, but it just gets richer and richer the more I look into it.
So this is a little repetitive too, but I thought I would just ask a separate question about it. Can you walk me through the process of you sort of talked about that moment when you first had, you and Peter first had the idea of doing the project.
Yeah.
But walk me through the process of, again, selecting the interviewees, identifying themes, doing the research, sitting down with them, how long it takes. I mean, just kind of,
Sure.
just kind of the nitty-gritty of
Yeah.
how it happened.
That's a good question. It's something that's not understood. It looks fairly simple. Oh, you sit down, you set up a microphone or a video camera, and you ask questions. And people say, well, how can it be any more complicated than that? Every individual has a unique life story and a background, and part of what I want to do for these is to be able to ask them questions that are, unique to their experience, so that we can have a rich interview. So it entails a lot of background research. There might be some topics that I might know some general things about, but there are specific things within that. Like, for example, when I interviewed Barry Verco, the computer music, personally, I've done a lot of electronic music and computer music over the years myself, but what he did was very different from what I did. So there was a lot of work that I had to do with that. Or I think of when I interviewed J Kaiser, a jazz trombonist and linguist. And I was particularly interested in asking him about kind of linguistics and music. I don't have a background in linguistics, so I had to do a fair amount of that so I could really ask some good questions, and it really paid off. But also looking at some of the cultural history. What was happening in the Boston area musically at a particular time. Say they were a jazz musician. Who were some of the figures who had come to some of the jazz clubs at the day? So things like that. Then, speaking with the people before the interview about what oral history is, what's involved with that, and gaining their confidence. Some of these people have been interviewed by journalists who are prying into personal questions, and gaining their confidence that that's not how it works, that there is no question that they're obligated in any way to answer. And some of them have given me some off the record responses to certain things, but really gaining their trust, and that it really is that I value what they have to say, and then they become personally invested in the process as well. Sometimes in a second interview, somebody will bring some documentation, but they also sometimes go home and kind of do their homework and brush up on dates and things like that. So I will oftentimes do some pre-interviews with people. Oftentimes on the phone, but if I can, I meet with them. And then I get a whole bunch of other questions and topics, which then I do some more research on. Sometimes there are issues that I thought would be really important to somebody, and it was of no importance at all, and in the pre-interview, I was able to resolve some of those things. So that's a real important part of it. Then there is the actual interview itself, and if I'm planning on doing another interview, I will make some detailed notes about the interview, and things that I want to follow up on the next interview. So there's some kind of field notes that I keep. Then once the interviews with a particular individual is done, then there's the transcript of the interview, and there we've had different ways of doing that. But basically, I get a rough transcript back. Then I have to go through and make corrections to the initial transcript. Either some things that just the transcriber misunderstood, but also getting spellings of names. And sometimes that can be quite time-consuming. And during the interview, if somebody mentions a name, I try when I can to make sure that I get their complete name, but sometimes I'm not able to, and oftentimes in the interview I'm not able to get the spelling. So there's a lot of stuff like that. But also sometimes they'll mention a name, but I'm not able to say, and who was that, just because I couldn't break up the conversation. So in the transcript, there will be an annotation explaining that. So those kinds of things. Then there's all kinds of metadata that needs to be collected for cataloging reasons. And this website that things are going up on, we want people to be able to search by names and topics and subjects and things like that. So there's a lot of work that way. And there's also metadata that gets embedded in the various media files that we're creating for this, for both the website, but also for long-term preservation in the MIT archives. And then there's the organization of the background research I did. There are a lot of files there that support what I did, and some scholars who might be using these in the future, and I've had some MIT students who've already used some of my interviews. Those folders with my research notes were helpful to them because there were things that were relevant to that person that didn't come up in the interview, but help explain what was in the interview. So those are some that's kind of the basic process there.
Great. So I want to, in a couple of minutes, I want to turn to this, having you introduce some of the individuals that you had identified as being people we would pull selections from. But before we do that, I was wondering if you could just kind of do a take two on something. I really like that story of sort of how you guys came up with the idea of doing this, what the origin of the project was. And I was wondering if you could tell that again, just so we have another version of it. The sort of, what the original idea, where that came from.
Okay.
If you wouldn't mind.
Sure. Back in 1976, my father had interviewed my grandmother, Lucille Sorensen, who was a ragtime pianist and also played for silent films back in South Dakota. And my dad had the wherewithal to see that there were no recordings of her playing, but also understood that she had a real story to tell about her life in music. So I heard that recording, and it left a real deep impression on me. Then I went off to college, and a friend of mine gave me a book of written or put together by Vivian Perlis, who was one of the first oral historians in music. In fact, oral historians consider her the first oral historian in the field of music. And it was a collection of interviews with people who had known the composer Charles Ives. By the time she started that project, Charles Ives had died. And that left a real deep impression on me. And little did I know that I would end up doing that later on. So then I'm here at MIT in the MIT Music Library, and I'm sitting at the front desk, the circulation desk, and Professor Stephen Erdely, who had grown up in Hungary and gone to the Franz Liszt Conservatory in Hungary, and Béla Bartók and Zoltán Kodály, those composers he had worked with, and was telling me about some of those experiences. And my boss, Peter Munstedt, heard that conversation, and afterwards we said, gee, it's too bad we didn't have a tape recorder running. We realized what he was saying was stuff that's probably not in the history books. And Peter happened to mention that conversation to Teresa Tobin, and also just our recognition that there were other MIT faculty who had some unique historical knowledge that wasn't likely to get into the historical record. And Teresa, soon after that, noticed that there was an oral history workshop offered at Simmons College. Professor Alan Smith taught that workshop, and so I went to that, and so for the first 5 years or so of the project, I was doing the interviews on top of my already full-time job, and starting in 2007 we got funding for this from Lionel Kinney, class of 1953, for it to be half of my job. So that's the genesis of the project.
What so it's a pretty long time span. What's the time span we're talking about? So you got sort of.
So 1999 is when this started. Yeah, and 2007 is when we got the funding from Lionel Kinney.
And it goes on.
We hope so.
So let's. How are we doing on time?
34 out of 45.
Okay. So do you mind just kind of providing just a brief introduction to J Kaiser, Barry Burko, the sort of the list that we sent, which was based on the clips that you had pulled?
Yeah.
Just kind of introduce who each of these people are for those who might not know, and what sort of why you wanted to sit down with them, and maybe you can kind of introduce the sort of key things that you had.
Okay, so let's do Samuel or J Kaiser and Barry Burko first, and then
Sure.
we'll.
Absolutely.
Okay, so Samuel J Kaiser, or as he's known by most people, J Kaiser. He's a professor of linguistics here, a real significant person in the field of linguistics, but he's also a very fine jazz trombonist. And he's an example of the depth of music here at MIT. It's not just, there are musicians outside the music faculty. There are MIT faculty who are very accomplished musicians. He had been involved in lots of ways with jazz at MIT. There was a group. He played for for many years. After the commencement, there would be some social gatherings, and he would provide the music for that for many years. And there were other MIT faculty members who were jazz musicians that he played. So anybody looking at jazz at MIT, J Kaiser is very involved in that. But I was also interested in his linguistics background and a linguist's view on jazz. There are things about jazz that can seem almost conversational in the way that you improvise and you trade fours with somebody. And I was had wondered about his perspective on that, and that was very, very interesting. So that was the genesis for that. And Barry Vercoe, a founding figure in the field of computer music. He was there right from the very beginning when the idea of using computers in music. So he was just a real great opportunity to talk to somebody like that. And it turns out that there were many things that came up in that interview that were not in a historical record about him. He was very interested in Renaissance choral music. One would think that somebody involved in computer music would only listen to kind of modern music, but he was very involved in. He was also a composer, and I was able to ask him about some of the non-computer related music that he had done. But it also turns out he played in his father's big band jazz group as a youngster. So those kinds of things gave a real interesting context to his later work in computer music. And his experience as a performing musician informed what he wanted to do in the field of computer music, as far as how can we use computers to assist live performers, as opposed to it being something that you just either use a computer to edit stuff, or it be some kind of static thing that you play along with live musicians. But how can you get computers to actually interact with live musicians? And his background as a performing musician really informed that. But you read the academic papers by him, you don't see any of that. So that was that. Professor Jean Bamberger, she's a pianist and a music theorist. She was a student of the legendary pianist Arthur Schnabel, and she's also a renowned expert on the field of how children learn music. So her background as a pianist, and she was had worked closely with the composer Roger Sessions, and it had premiered some of his new music. And she had also had a Fulbright scholarship to study with Olivier Messiaen in France, and also worked with the composer Ernst Krenek. So those things in and of itself were just so rich and compelling. And then her work, here at MIT, teaching music theory. I didn't give a very good, succinct
So you want to do that
introduction.
again?
Let's try that again. All right. So, okay, Professor Jean Bamberger. She's a pianist, a music theorist, studied with the legendary pianist Arthur Schnabel, and worked with the composer Roger Sessions. She's a well-respected music theorist in lots of different aspects of the field of music theory. Also an expert on how children learn music. And she had also developed some computer software to help students learn how to compose and do other kind of creative things with music. So that's Dean Bamberger. Jamshid Sharifi. He was.
So we'll start when you're not looking down.
Yeah.
So
All right. I just want to make sure I got
Yeah,
his date here.
absolutely.
All right. So Jamshid Sharifi is MIT class of 1983. He had played in the MIT Festival Jazz Ensemble under Herb Pomeroy, a major figure here at MIT, who had founded the MIT Festival Jazz Ensemble. And after he graduated from MIT, he went to the Berklee College of Music and did some further studies with Herb Pomeroy there. And after Herb retired, then Jamshid conducted the Festival Jazz Ensemble after that, and subsequently has gone on to do lots of work in field music, in world music, and he's a pianist and arranger. And earlier this year, he had come back to MIT. MIT had commissioned a piece from him called "The Awakening." It's a piece honoring the Arab Spring, and it was a piece written for the MIT Wind Ensemble. So when Jamshid came back for that, I interviewed him at that time. But he's an example of an MIT student getting a thorough music education and going on to be truly a world-class musician. John Bavicki had been a student here at MIT in the late 40s. He didn't finish school, and then had gone into the Navy, and then came back and on the GI Bill had gone to the New England Conservatory of Music. His father was a major construction contractor here in the Boston area, and had expected his eldest son to follow him in a trade, and that's why he had gone to MIT. But John said he hated engineering, but he had enough of the engineering training that he worked as a structural engineer designing some of the high-rise buildings in downtown Boston. But as soon as he could, he really wanted to be a composer. But then he has further connections with MIT. He was a real close friend and colleague of John Corley, who was the founding director of the MIT concert band. And so John Bavicki wrote a number of pieces for the MIT concert band. Although he had sung in the MIT Glee Club at MIT, it wasn't the musical experiences for him as a student that he left a legacy. It was his later work with John Corley.
Great. So let's just sort of do that introduction that we talked about. So if I ask you to sort of riff on the beginning, the Music at MIT Oral History Project is.
Okay.
So start. I mean, not to put words in your mouth, but start that way, and then.
So the Music at MIT Oral History Project has two basic functions in terms of what it's attempting to do. It's attempting, on one hand, to document the rich musical legacy of music here at MIT among students, staff, and faculty. And also, there's some administrative stuff in terms of documenting also some of the administrative history that might not be so kind of eye-catching, but useful as well. But also, these people's lives, both the faculty and the students, many of these people's musical lives go far beyond MIT. So really trying to capture that as well.
Great. And you've mentioned this, but again, maybe as a complete thought, when did it start? You don't have to tell the story of how it started, but when did it start and how has it evolved over the years?
Okay. So the Music at MIT Oral History Project started in 1999, and for the first, well, up until 2007, it was something I did on top of my full-time job. And then in 2007, we got funding from Lionel Kinney, class of 1953, for that to be part of my half of my full-time job.
And
I think you need a drink of water and we'll try that.
oh, okay, yeah, it's getting a little raspy. We're almost done. So.
We want your sound in your best.
So let's try take two on that.
Yeah.
So just tell me again, when did it start and how did it evolve? How did the project evolve?
The Music at MIT Oral History Project started in 1999, and up until 2007, it was I did it on top of my full-time job, and it was then in 2007 that we got funding from Lionel Kinney, class of 1953, to for me to do that as officially half of my full-time job.
And you've answered this as well, but tell me how many interviews you've done, and also I know it's a combination of video and audio. It might be a good idea to sort of talk about that, and you know, some of them are video. How many are video?
Yeah, I got some stats here.
Yeah,
And I'll,
yeah, so let's just talk about some of those stats.
all right. Where did I? Some of it I've memorized, but as far as
You said it was 49, I guess?
yeah, but I can also tell you how many.
Great.
Okay. All right, there are, the Music at MIT Oral History Project has 49 separate interview sessions with 29 people. So that means that there are some people I've interviewed more than once. Most of them are audio, but 7 are video.
And then my last question, unless Heather has other things she'd like to add, or if you do, I was just wondering if you could sort of, I guess I'm really interested to hear how you felt getting a chance to sit down with some of these people. I mean, some of these people are quite incredible people, and you've talked about sort of I think one sort of, you know, the 107-year-old gentleman who you got to talk to. But just talk about what it was like for you personally to be able to spend some really significant time with some of these legends.
Yeah, it truly has been an honor and privilege to be able to do this project and to get to know these people in a fairly deep and profound way. When I see these people outside of the interviews, there's a deep connection there. Every time I see them, we remember that, and I dream about these people all the time. And I wake up in the morning and I just, these people just continue to have a constant presence in my life, even if they I haven't seen them, or in some cases some of them have already passed away, but they're so I feel like in a really meaningful way my life has been deeply enriched by this experience, but also having the privilege of becoming an oral historian in the way that the oral history community has really honored me. Not to toot my own horn, but last October at the national conference, I was one of the featured speakers at the national convention. It meant a lot to me. But it was also a way of letting the community know about the legacy of music here at MIT. But it truly has been an honor and a privilege. And to know that these people's lives are documented in this way, and that they will be preserved by the MIT archives for hopefully forever. That means a lot to me, and that I could be the facilitator for that. And my role as an oral historian during the interviews is to let the person talk, and for me to kind of stay out of the way. And I think in a lot of ways that has worked out really well.
So that actually prompts one last question for me, if it's okay, which you've answered all along, but I'm just going to ask it separately, which is, why are projects like this important?
Yeah, oral history is an interesting discipline in that it recognizes that there are things about people and culture that don't often get into the written historical record. So oral history attempts to capture those things. Most people don't write a memoir because that's not how they live their lives. I'm certainly not going to write a memoir. And many of these people I've interviewed would never occur to them to write a memoir. So here was a chance to capture really important aspects of these people's lives, both their musical lives, but sometimes their non-musical lives that were major things shaped who they are. And oral history has a great way of capturing that. So I'm really committed to the kinds of things that oral history can capture that otherwise would have been lost. I think of John Corley, who had taught here at MIT for 51 years. He was a major figure with this, at the time, this new idea that concert bands do music written originally for that instrumentation as opposed to orchestral transcriptions. And I got to talk to him about kind of what that was and what that meant to him. Those are the kinds of things that I was able to talk to him. You read the history books on the history of the concert band in the United States, and he's not mentioned. Or I found one book, there's one little tiny reference to him. So that's those kinds of things.
Great. So is there anything you want to add that we haven't touched on? Do you think is important about the project, or?
Yeah. Oral history as a discipline is one of those things that, if we look at kind of current cultural trends, there's on one hand there's an interest in audio, in video, as opposed to the printed page, but what oral history because of its commitment to in-depth interviews. It's very different from kind of our soundbite culture. And it's really hard when I was trying to find excerpts from this, and I've made excerpts for some people because they want to get some sense for that. It's really hard because the things they're talking about aren't kind of soundbiteable. So that's something. But also our culture today doesn't, because it's so fast-paced and it's so kind of business-oriented in terms of productivity and, metrics and all that. And oral history kind of flies in the face of a lot of that because of it's not, it doesn't kind of reduce itself down to that. So that's another aspect of oral history that really means a lot to me.
Heather, did you want to ask anything else?
I think I wondered about it. And Forrest, you mentioned the Kinneys and how they, the funding of your position. I wondered if you would say that they made this possible, that the project might have not happened without their funding?
So the funding from Lionel Kinney.
And you should answer to me. Yeah.
Yeah. So the funding from Lionel Kinney was important. So the project, up to that point, I had done these audio interviews, but there was no funding for transcripts, and we just didn't have the time to do the transcripts. So that was a significant turning point there. And also the funding allowed me to do, many more interviews. And then the 7 video interviews were also possible because of his funding, because they're much more expensive that way. His funding was critical, but prior to that, there were certainly interviews that were happening, but we didn't have the resources to do the transcripts.
And I guess one question I have too is, you've sort of referenced it, but where do these oral histories live?
So we have printed transcripts and audio CDs of many of them, and the videos. All both the audio and the videos are going up on a website, so those will be available sometime in later this spring, and probably in May.
Can we? I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. Can we do that again without a time reference, so that if people, you know what I mean?
Okay.
So that,
Sure.
so that this isn't dated. We can't show it after April.
Yeah.
So just just that they're going up on a website.
Okay.
That's exactly what I was trying to get at.
So the audio and video will be up on a website, and there will be, and also on the website will be downloadable printed transcripts, so that many historians and other people using that they need the printed transcript when they need to excerpt stuff in the work that they're doing. The MIT archives, I'm also working with them for preservation of the audio and the video as well. So for both the audio and the video, there will also be preservation copies of the original format, so that if for some reason, say, there's a bunch of changes in video technology, and that the stuff on the website wasn't able to be preserved, we still have the media for that, and the obviously the printed transcripts will also be available. So that's the answer there.